Welcome back to another episode of Hungry for the Word. As always, I'm your host, Tommy Vento, with my lovely co host, Julie Vento. And as we continue our belief mini series with episode 5 in the series here, we're calling this one The Lord is Near. Although, depending on your translation, you might say the Lord is at hand. You might say the Lord is nigh. The Lord is here. There's many different ways to say it, and we'll kind of cover all of that today. A little bit of a call it a two-pronged approach to that word and what it means to both of us. So as we dive into that, what do you think of when you say the Lord is near, or rather, when we say the Lord is near?
Mm, I I love that because I think when I started my walk, um, I envisioned him, up in heaven, away,
Mm,
up
mm,
there,
totally.
and to learn that he is near, um, as close as the breath that I breathe.
Hmm.
Um, it's it's a wonderful way to walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny because the thought of it doesn't seem so wonderful at first when especially I'll say for myself, I imagine most of the human condition, but I I had had so much negative experience in relationships with other people that the idea of being together 24/7 with a guy who I only sort of liked at the time sounded not so great. Um, but boy, how things change, right? To from that mindset to, the prayer pretty consistently over the last few weeks for me, especially as this belief series has been top of mind, top of heart, that he can't be close enough. I more and more of the presence is what I want to stand in and experience. And so part of where this episode comes from, I'll say just after the halfway mark, it is kind of a reset that as we talk about belief, we went down a couple different avenues. And this verse came to me just really as a reminder of what belief is all about. And in fact, I'm going to um, add a second one to it that to me says the same thing. But it's Philippians 4, verse 4, where it says, Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone, for the Lord is near. And as I looked up that verse, in fact, I'll read the second one so I can jump back to that. In Thessalonians, it is First Thessalonians 5, verse 16, 17, 18. We've read this one before where what is the Lord's will for you? Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. So the idea that he's near is something that bears rejoicing. And in that Philippians verse, as I looked up Blue Letter Bible, one of our favorite resources, the Greek word, I'm going to totally butcher this to anybody who does speak Greek. Ergus, ergus is the Greek word for near, and it's translated in a multitude of ways because it's both a noun and an adverb, meaning it's a descriptive word as well as it being a literal, call it fact, call it circumstance. So that near is saying locationally or in perspective to. It's also saying at hand, nigh, close by. And from the adverb perspective, you had said, as close as my breath. The word really means in conjunction to something else. So saying the Lord is near, as it's used here, it's kind of this open ended, when the flip side of that is that near to everything. It's near to all. And so that includes you. He couldn't be closer. And I was telling you before we started this episode that, as recently as last night, I realized that in call it a lapse of judgment, a moment of unawareness, that I still hold the belief at times that he and I are separate, that there are moments away from him. I think we can take that in the negative way, where you feel like he doesn't see you doing something wicked, or you're ashamed about something and he won't know about it until you bring it forth, that kind of thing. But on the positive side, that these moments where I feel uh, really strong emotion in any direction, that that emotion overwhelming me in my body doesn't change his nearness. It doesn't make him any
Mm,
closer or farther. He can't be. He is perpetually one with me. I love the way Chris describes it, that you don't have these two little oxygen tanks inside of you. One of them is Tommy's spirit, and the other one is Christ's spirit. It's one spirit. It is
mm,
one being now. And in that same way, he's that close. We share the oxygen tank, or rather, as he told me last night, dude, we're in the same boat. We're
mm.
sitting in the same canoe out at sea. Let's row the same way. Let's have peace. Let's put away the fear. Again, I'm sort of digressing, but
Yeah.
as we are thinking about belief, part of him being near was, I'll say, a challenge to me to see how much I believe that he's not, how much I tend to believe in moments in my abandonment, or that something isn't going to work out for my good, that I need to take care of myself, as much as that is kind of a low static vibration that I hold in the background of my life, which prevents me in many ways from stepping out and living in the promises he's already shared with us, you know?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of how important it is how we define God, right?
Mm,
Like you said, either if our definition or idea of God is that he's up in heaven and he's far away, or if he is this close,
mm.
I don't want him to see everything.
Right.
And again, I think as we walk in this journey with him, we um as that definition becomes more aligned with the truth that's in
Mm,
the word about him, um, that we can kind of walk through those two extremes, if you will, that
right.
he's close and that that's a good
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. Exactly. Well, there was a couple verses that you had brought up, but um, two that are kind of coming to mind specifically: Psalm 139 and Jeremiah 23. You mind reading those off for
Oh,
us?
yeah.
Because to me, those are the two extremes you're sort of painting, and a reminder to, or not to, but a reminder that in the kingdom we can hold both those extremes as true at the same time.
Yeah. So Psalm 139, starting in verse 7. Where shall I go from your spirit, or where
Mm,
shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me and your right hand shall hold me.
mm, what a beautiful way of showing. what I think, um, again, I don't know if it was in this series that we were talking about Peter, but Peter denying Jesus. And I think of the moments afterwards, how he just breaks down into tears. And when Jesus is raised and comes back, he seeks out Peter. He makes sure to tell them, "Hey, tell Peter I'm back. I'm looking for him." Because that to me is Peter has made his bed deep in the depths in Sheol, in the realm of the dead. That how much worse could you feel that he tells you you'll deny him, you swear up and down that you won't, and then you do. And so he goes back to being a fisherman. He doesn't even think he's worthy to be a disciple anymore, even after walking with Jesus all those years. And Jesus comes and confirms his love for Peter despite Peter's action. And so again, that idea
Mm,
that he's near, part of the life altering perception of self that comes with shame is the knowing, in air quotes, by the knowledge of good and evil, that you don't deserve his presence. That is true on a level.
mhm,
You physically can't be close to him because he is so righteous that unrighteousness can't exist. In in the book of Enoch, it talks about facing God or being away from God. And it's as simple as faucet on, faucet off. And you just have your back to God. And so there's no light on your face. And ultimately, shame makes us think we're that way. And yet, through belief, through understanding who Jesus is, that way has been removed from us. That no matter what we've done or what we continue to do, I'll say, his presence is still near. And the condemnation that we tend to feel, a lot of people argue it's a good thing. And again, on one level, it's not wrong. It is good that you feel bad when you steal from your neighbor. It is good when you feel bad that you insult someone and really hurt their feelings. And yet, if he says you're clean, you're clean. And if he says he's near, then the truth of his nearness is that it, think of throwing a sofa at the sun. It melts instantly. It can't even make it into its force field for how hot and righteous and pure the sun is. And in that same way, you being near to him and Jesus being near to you means that that is perpetually the state that you get to exist in. If, to your point, we know and understand that and then choose to know and understand that, you know?
yeah. I'm also thinking when you were talking about that, the idea of the sacrifices in the Old Testament. And the offerings. I didn't quite understand those because of my understanding of God, but as
Mm,
I continued to walk, I studied that out with the help of other teachers, of course. But the Greek word is very similar to the Hebrew word for offering. It's Korban,
okay.
and it means draw near.
Mm,
It's a draw near offering. And so even at the time that the Lord gave the Israelites the sacrificial system, he understood how humans work. It's
mm.
he doesn't go anywhere, but we turn, we have the light not on our face, as
Yeah.
you just mentioned. And so the offering system was to help us as humans draw back to him He
Mm.
didn't go anywhere. It's us just turning back to him for, for whatever reason we turned away in the first place.
Sure.
Usually shame and guilt
Hmm.
are the reasons we turn in the first
Well, and it's funny because again, that even our concept of an offering has been so skewed because of the, culture and society that we've grown up in, that to your point, I think of Cain and Abel, the original offering, that when it speaks, and I know I always get it backwards. I don't care, and I
place.
don't care if you correct me. You can. Um, I think Abel is the farmer, right? Or rather the shepherd.
Yes.
And it says that he brought the firstlings of his flock, where Cain, it says, in due time, he brought the Lord produce. And so it's this kind of uh, Abel's response is of the heart. It's not forced, it's not taught. He wants to give the first thing that he has so that the Lord will draw near. That's what he wants out of this. Whereas Cain does it because he's supposed to do it. And I think of that verse that um, you had also mentioned beforehand. I have it here, Isaiah 29, verse 13 and 14. The Lord said, because these people draw near with their mouths and honor me with their lips, while their hearts are far from me, and their worship of me is a human commandment learned by rote. That that's what you're talking about. This idea of an
Mhm.
offering is to be near to him in heart. It's for us to draw near to him because he hasn't gone anywhere. And so I don't even mean to imply this negative connotation that to turn towards him means you had to turn away. I think that the what we're talking about and the fullness of what's on offer, the Bible started in the garden because that's his hope for humanity, to be in the garden with him every day. And the Bible ends with humans together with God again. And it doesn't look like the same garden, so to speak, because it's probably a double portion. It's a triple portion. It's a hundredfold what was originally intended. All that to say, his heart is to walk with us. And the offering is the way that we, from our own hearts, express our desire to draw near him, not something learned by commandment that you're supposed to do to please him. You know what I
Mm.
mean?
Oh, that's beautifully put. Yeah.
Um, and so that, not to say that wraps it up, so to speak, but when I think of that first leg of what it means that he's near, that really nicely sums it up for me. Do you have anything else you want to add before we sort of move on to the second piece of that?
No, no, go ahead.
So the not even the flip side, the additional piece of the idea that he's near, to me, has to do with time. We think in terms of space and time being sort of the two guiding principles of Newtonian physics, call it. And so he's near in space, but he's also near in time. And so you had said in the beginning that this misconception of he's up there, even in the revisited walk that I've had with him, not so much the first time around, but as we've really kind of gotten to know him, in a lot of ways, I have still put him off in the future. I think
Mm.
especially, you know, gosh, every age since Moses has said, oh, this is it. This is the end. Look at how terrible, look at how unrighteous everyone is. There's wickedness everywhere. It's got to be over. And so our generation is not exempt from that. And in a lot of ways, I sort of put off into the future the fact that, yeah, it kind of looks like this and Jesus will come one day, he'll come on a cloud. I can't wait for the rapture. I can't wait for God to do something about this. And yet we have a couple examples of to really know him and be close to him is to understand that he transcends time and that your belief in him utterly pulls him through time into this moment so that time isn't a factor anymore. And that does sound kind of sci-fi. It sounds, maybe a little beyond the quantum, but as I kind of jump into the examples, would there any be, I don't even want to say preface, but any thoughts you have before we dive into a little bit of that description?
Well, just wrapping it up to the beginning of the story and the end of the story. I like that. The arc of the entire story is us walking in the cool of the day in the garden with him. And, Jesus teaches us to pray on earth as it is in heaven, right?
Mm,
That is what we're trying to pull in at this
totally,
juncture, if you will.
totally. And that's a perfect transition to what these characters do in their own walk with the Lord. So first example I have, and we'll um, hopefully we'll get all these anecdotes into our show notes as far as verses so you can follow up a little more deeply, but also a quick Google search in case we don't. The first one is Moses and the tent of meeting. And at the time, there's this Ark of the Covenant, which is where the presence of the Lord is. And again, we see, in fact, earlier we talked about in Exodus 40, he gives him instruction for the tabernacle. But before that even happened, Moses experiences God in the burning bush. And I've heard it taught that the most beautiful thing of that whole story is that he tells Moses, take your shoes off. And he does say you're standing on holy ground. But another point of that is how far are you going to get in the desert barefoot? That stand here with me now, be present, and know that I'm right here. And Moses doesn't wait to experience the Lord again after that. He puts up a tent so that he can go into that place and meet with the Lord. And again, there's this, I'll call it hypertension of him being instructed to do that and him just doing it because he knows the Lord's character. And so that is available to him because that's who the Lord is, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Then we see it again with David, who David is often called the man after the Lord's heart. And David writes many, many Psalms about our generation, which is the one who gets to live under the new covenant with Jesus. How great and glorious is that, he says. And in fact, I don't know actually timeline wise, maybe he's 1,000 years before Jesus. That's a guess. All that
Mm-hmm.
to say, he sees that and knows this heart of the Lord. And in Psalm 51, we see him say, I'm just going to live in that now because that's who you are. You are
Mm-hmm.
going to do that. And so you're so good that it's already here. And the Lord doesn't deny him. And it's interesting to me that I'm hesitant to say this as a sweeping statement, but the Lord doesn't necessarily confirm these things to David. It's not like he expresses them and so David believes his word. I think part of David being a man after his heart is he sought the Lord himself and so knew this about his character and declared it to him rather than the other way around. And the examples coming up with Jesus, the same exact thing happens. So I'll pause there. I know I'm throwing a lot at us. Anything sticking out to you?
Well, I think the idea is, and we touched on this, he's not a liar, or he
Mhm.
doesn't change, right? So we see characters in the Bible that understand his nature even before the rest of the world does, if you
Yes.
will. And they interact and they have experiences with the Lord that seem to be before their time, if you
Mm,
will.
that's really well said. Um, and so again, I'll, in the sake of time, I'll just say the final two examples. We have his mom, Mary, at the wedding in Cana, where I've always thought it was funny. I kind of breezed over it because, again, I didn't really understand it. He goes to this wedding, and his mom says to him, they've run out of wine. And he's like, woman, what do you want me to do it? Why are you telling me this? And she just turns around and says, do whatever he tells you. And again, I didn't really get it. Like, he doesn't say yes. He, in fact, says, it's not my time. It's not about to happen. And it's almost like her response is, but I know you will. But I know who you are. I'm so close to you that I know you won't let this happen. And I love how The Chosen shows it. You know, they give a little bit more narrative to that story. They show a little bit more context and such. But again, like you said, it's ultimately this interaction that's before its time. He says, it's not my time yet. She's like, I think it is because I'm asking for it.
Yeah.
And then the second is maybe it's the Syrophoenician woman, maybe something like that, where she comes to him and she's asking for healing. And this is still relatively early in his ministry. So he says, it's not for the Gentiles yet, basically. He says, you know, the you're not going to get any of this food. And she says, well, even the dogs get crumbs from the table. And he's like, okay, you get me. You know who I am. You know this is coming. You know that even the birds are fed. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barn. And how much more valuable are they? Or how much more valuable are you than they? And so she's making this call on his character. And so outside of time, she pulls who he is into her experience so that time became irrelevant to whether or not Jesus had accomplished this for the Gentiles yet, you know?
Yeah.
Mm. So
And
as
I
we,
like the way you
yeah.
say that make a call on his character.
Mhm.
And I love the way, we started this conversation by saying that your understanding of God is so important because it is your understanding of him that allows you to call on his character.
Yes,
And he
100%.
is near. Yeah.
And so I think as we wind this episode down, the concept that he is near in both space and time, what does that mean for us? I think it means different things to different people based on where they are in their walk and what their life circumstances are. But I know how much I have doubted his character. And both to my chagrin and to his broken heart, I have done so. And his love language is to be believed. And so, this idea that no longer are there offerings and sacrifices that we can give to him other than our heart to truly believe in him. Now that all has been accomplished through Jesus, everything needed to satisfy the requirement for us to be close to him again, the last piece of the puzzle is just us believing that. And so I'd encourage you today to believe even more deeply that he's near in more ways than one, and leaning not on your own understanding, will tremendously improve and increase the amount that you can experience him being near.
Mm.
What about you?
Well, I'm thinking of James
Mm,
4:8, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you.
yeah.
That is how it works. And as we talked about, we have this idea that he's the one far away, but
Right.
if you could start to believe that as you draw near to him, that's what
Mm,
it takes. Be
amen.
open to that. So
Amen. All right, friends. We'll see you in the next episode.